All right, we're going ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everyone who is joining us today for our virtual Kubernetes CNCF Canadian meetups, and we're going to have KubeCon recap today. So myself, Archie, I'm a host of the meetup today, and today I'm not alone. I have a whole group of people joining, help me out to organize this event. Sebastian from Quebec City. We have Marino Vijay from Solo joining us from Toronto. We also have Michael Foster from Toronto joining us. Thanks. So two DevRels in the one show. And then we have a new member of our org team joining us from Waterloo, right? Christine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Kim, and I work at Google in DevRel as well. I focus primarily on Kubernetes and service meshes like Istio. So I was also at KubeCon this year, which was my first in person.
Yeah, so for her, for Kristen, it was easy way to become an organizer just by meeting us at KubeCon, and I think she met most of the people, and we liked the energy, and we decided to invite her to our team. And we also, always looking for somebody in Kitchener-Waterloo to help us with the in-person events, and I hope Kristen will be helping us. So thanks for joining us, Kristen, and we're looking forward to having you over this. A few housekeeping items as usual. So we have a lot of ways to follow us. So you can join us LinkedIn, you can follow us on Twitter, and obviously we have our Slack channel where we have pretty active discussions channel where you can ask any questions around Kubernetes, Istio, or CNCF projects. We posting announcements, and also like when you're going to KubeCon, there's always somebody there to meet you. For today's agenda, we want to go over the KubeCon North America and Detroit recap. So all the organizers who are today with us went to KubeCon, so they have a lot of things to share with you, and maybe some of you who are joining us as well want to share anything. Let us know. We can put you live as well. We also have a few lightning talks. So Marino is going to cover serverless, sidecarless Istio service mesh, which is called Ambient mesh. I'm looking forward to learn about it. And we also going to have a quick recap of presentation that Sebastian and myself did at KubeCon, and we just want to share a couple of links with you. So if you want to set your laptop to be productive with Kubernetes, we have actually like online resource right now that you can follow. And then as usual, we have a quick recap for and some survey. As usual, we want to thank our sponsors, and we really want to thank JFrog at this time because they just signed a new sponsorship with us. So they're going to be our silver sponsors for in-person and hybrid and virtual events. And like especially when we're organizing those events in person, we always need some support. Speakers needs help with traveling. Maybe there's some cost for venues sometimes, some pizza costs. So like if you know anyone or if you're working in a company that wants to sponsor, please reach out to us in the Slack channel. We are happy to explain how we're working. So for us, it's a huge help. During pandemic, we did everything virtually, so there was pretty much zero cost required. But now we're moving back to in-person events, and we really want, to have at least some budget to be able to travel between the cities and then bring you great speakers. So this is a QR code as well. Like if you want to become a sponsor, we have a slide deck with all the information. All right, moving forward with the housekeeping items. So during the online meetup, you're not able to talk as attendee, but there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to ask any questions, please drop your questions there, and we're going to be monitoring and answering the questions. And if you want to be a speaker one day, we have different ways to reach out to us. If you want to present in person in one of the cities, we have paper call links for each city. We also have virtual tech talks like today. So if you want to present in a virtual event, you can submit your talks there. And we're going to share the slides. So if you're not be able to capture the links, you can get them later. A few announcements that we want to share with you today. So first of all, we are super excited to have a first in-person CNCF and Kubernetes meetup in Quebec City. Pour les gens qui parlent français, I think they're going to get excited. So we tried to make sure that this meetup is not only in person, but also it's going to be in French mostly. So all the organizers are going to be speaking French, and presentation will be in French. So for the people who really wants to feel again that feeling of the community, this is going to be happening in Carrigan. I think it's a bar. It's a nice place. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And obviously the organizers, Sebastian and also Mathieu, they will be happy to host you. And they're looking also for your feedback in the sense if people are ready for Kubernetes Community Days in Quebec City. So if you're from Quebec, please make sure you attend this event on November 16th. And you're going to learn about, there's going to be a lot of lightning talks where you can learn about GitOps, about Ambient Mesh, and about many other things. All right, moving forward, Toronto. So November 17th, so some of us will have to fly to Toronto. And we're going to have a in-person event in Cohere. It's a nice company in Toronto that is working in the AI and ML space. So they kindly hosting us in their premises. So we're gonna have we're gonna have Istio Ambient Mesh workshop. So hands-on experience, or you can follow along with interactive workshop. We're going to have a couple of lightning talks, and then we decided to have a happy hour sponsored by Solo. We're just gonna go somewhere nearby because it's very difficult in Toronto and Ontario in general to have drinks at the venue itself. So we decided to have like happy hour so we can go and just continue chatting about all things Kubernetes during the happy hour. So join us on November 17th. Next week, after that, we actually have another event in person, which is in Montreal. So it's going to be in PwC Montreal event. We're going to have 60 people capacity. We just posted the event, so if you want to RSVP, again, there's going to be lightning talks and also Istio Ambient Mesh interactive workshop. And finally, Ottawa. So we have another meetup in Ottawa, which is in person in PwC Ottawa. We're also going to have a workshop, and we're going to have happy hours at the end. So this is a program that all the team put it here like right after Kubecon. There was a lot of work from our side just to find the venues and everything. So I really want to thank this team on the call that helped me and help us to put these things together. And thanks to PwC and Cohere helping with the venues. All right, with that, I want to pass the mic to Michael Foster.
Pass the mic to Mike, yes. This is just going to be a nice little recap. For those who don't know, KubeCon's 3 days. Oh, I got to share my screen too, Archie?
No, it's okay.
Okay, I was going to say, throw those slides back up there. KubeCon is 3 days. It's Wednesday to Friday, but there are co-located events. So Monday, Tuesday, you get a nice choice of 200 level content on. And then there's Cloud Native Rejects, which is everything that gets rejected from KubeCon, which is on Sunday. So now that the groundwork has been laid, let's talk about the numbers, and then we're going to kind of break it down by each section, do a little fireside chat, and then get into the talks. Archie, next slide. So for the numbers, 17K total, 7K physical, and 10 virtual. The showroom floor was definitely packed, a lot better than last year, LA, because I know that was still a little bit of an iffy time. But yeah, over 1,500 total talk submissions, 166 accepted talks, and each of the co-located events also had their own. And it's getting to the point now where Cloud Native Security Con is going to have its own event just because I think they have so much attendance and people that are interested. So very cool to see it keep growing. And we're going to talk about the next KubeCon events coming up, Chicago next year. So stay tuned. Next slide.
Yeah, no, I just want to add, Mike, I think the actual report is going to be posted by CNCF maybe in a few weeks. So we didn't have like actual numbers. So if the actual numbers will be slightly different, we apologize in advance, but this is what we've heard from CNCF, like roughly speaking what was there. And we were just trying to figure out why we had more people in Europe, Kubecon, compared to North America. And we don't know exactly why, what happened, but like I think part of the problem maybe was mask mandate. There was a financial crisis that is happening, and maybe it's not everyone likes Detroit. I don't know. So we would like to hear why it's happening like that. But a lot of my colleagues were not able to come to KubeCon because of really it was hard to get approvals this time around. So hopefully the next KubeCons will be much better.
Detroit pizza was pretty good, though. I'll say that. For health and safety, yes. So the mask mandate was still in effect during the event. And then they checked when you first signed up if you had a negative test or if you were vaccinated. Overall, it was a, let's say, very safe event. There's emails that are getting sent out if you were at an event where something happened, but I haven't received any. So fingers crossed for my health. I think I'm okay. I think I made it this far. But yes, constantly learning and updating the policies, but overall extremely well attended and safe. Now for the next slide, I want to pass it off to Marino to talk about Cloud Native Rejects. This was the Sunday event, Marino?
Yeah, I like to call it the day -2 because there's usually a day -1 and then the day 0. But Cloud Native Rejects is really about all those talks that got rejected from KubeCon. You submit it here, and then you get accepted, and you'll get to speak. Interestingly enough, I submitted my rejected talk from KubeCon to this conference, and I was rejected again. So it was funny. But anyways, this was an amazing conference because what ended up happening is it's a very intimate setting. There's no more than about 100 attendees anyways. And they had it in this little site that was a little bit further away from downtown Detroit. So we had some great talks around community building, talks on networking, talks on eBPF and cryptocurrency detection. So a lot of great talks actually came about. And quite honestly, some of these speakers are just fantastic. So what's interesting is even if you didn't get rejected from KubeCon, you could still submit a talk to this. There's actually going to be another rejects happening in Europe or in Amsterdam. So I highly recommend folks submit to that as well. Or, even if you've never submitted to a conference before and you want some guidance or want to talk to any one of us, hit us up in the Slack. We'll walk you through submissions of a CFP. Back to you, Mike.
The video is going to be posted, Marino, from the rejects.
Yeah, actually, I think they're going through some editing right now. In fact, if you do, I thought that they had live streamed them. In fact, I'll go back and check and see if the live stream is still available, so you could probably watch the recordings off of YouTube. But I had a feeling that they had to make some edits or something like that. I can't recall.
All right, on to the day 0 events. We'll post a link for the photos coming up later, but there was a ton of events, so I don't want to ramble too much. Next slide, please, Archie. Like I said, a ton of events, so much that I had to put "and more" as I copy everything over. A few main themes that popped up because I was running Cloud Native Security Con and helping out a lot there. Supply chain, everything. Security works its way into everything now, so everybody has to market their supply chain features and what they do. WebAssembly continued to make strides. Docker announced support for WebAssembly, which was pretty interesting. A lot of managed services. So K8s are cropping up. Different consulting companies that are starting to get into their own management platforms. Developer experience continues to be a challenge. Backstage seemed to be in the lead. I was right next to Backstage Con, and people were out the door trying to actually watch what was going on. So very cool project. If you want to check that out. eBPF community continues to grow, adds more and more features. They're partnering with things like Grafana. Isoveil is partnering with Grafana, so trying to get more performance and scalability in terms of network and monitoring in the kernel. And then marketing to the edge is a battlefield. And I know Archie said, we went to Detroit and that was a specific location. I think it might have also been Tactic. It might have been Tactic because GM, Ford, a lot of the different providers were there. And they're definitely very interested in a lot of the edge capabilities that Kubernetes and CNCF are bringing forward. So that was my wrap up. Archie, any other things you want to add on there?
Oh yeah, no. From my side, I went to Open Observability Day and then GitOps Con. I find those days are kind of interesting in the sense that when you go to the room, you can find the people who are interested in that same space. So you can have a lot of chatters. about different projects. I wouldn't say that the talks were like really, really cool, but like I really like GitOps Con. There was a lot of interest around Argo CD. It seems like a lot of people using Argo CD these days, like more than Flux, in my opinion, from what I've seen there. But there was like good share of talks around Flux and Argo at the event, and I found, like this GitOps Con was pretty good, and I found a few talks from Adobe. It was pretty interesting how they're using Argo CD, and there was the other ones that is good to mention. And one thing as well, if you're a contributor to Kubernetes, there was another event which is called Contributor Summit or ContributorCon, like that was organized specifically for contributors. This is a good event for, if you're contributing to Kubernetes projects, you potentially supposed to be invited to this event, and you can meet all your fellow contributors from different world that you see in the GitHub, and there's different events has been organized for contributors as well. I usually tend to attend those, but this time, because I was preparing for my talk, I didn't have any time for that. But like, I just saw people at the end, like 3 o'clock at night, just very happy of all these meetings, and they had a very nice outfit, like a hockey kind of Kubernetes contributor outfit, which I really liked. So yeah, something if you are a contributor, you need to make sure that you are also attending those type of events, because there's a lot of learnings and meeting people who are contributing to Kubernetes and CNCF.
Cool. All right. Yeah. I had just a quick wrap up of the day 0 announcements. By the way, Argo CD, #1 growing community in CNCF last year. So not shocked by all of those talks. Project Sigstore announces GA. Anybody who is into, let's say, cosign or recore or anything like that, doing image signing and attestation verification. Very interesting to watch that project grow from about a year and a half ago. It got donated. Spiffy Inspire, we talked about this last meetup. They graduated, so they are now one of, I think, how many projects is it now, Archie? 16 that are in full graduation in the CNCF. Crossplane gains traction, definitely worth checking out. It's a, let's say, control plane for not only containers, but also other virtual machines and other things. And like I said, Grafana partnered with Isovalent, and Cloud Native SecurityCon is in February in Seattle, if anybody wants to not be warm in February. But it looks like there's a lot of attendees that are signing up. It's pretty cool to see a co-located event get to the point where it's grown so much it has its own event.
Yeah, Mike, actually, you were very close. So we have 18 graduated projects, 37 incubating, and 83 sandbox. So there's a lot of things to learn now, right? And it's just continue growing the ecosystem. And sometimes I'm just thinking, how to make sure that it's not too complicated for the end users just to navigate in this space. And I think I think those events that we're organizing supposed to be helping actually to clarify some of this. But yeah, happy
sure.
to hear you.
For the next slide, I think Archie, you and Marino, you guys put the slide together. Some of your top KubeCon announcements that you saw. You mind?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marino. First,
I'll actually go out of order here because I know that Michael's got some stuff to talk about as well, and so do you, Archie. But if you all haven't heard, Istio has applied to move into the incubating phase. So that means that now we're going to get more and more attention on the Istio service mesh. Cilium, Isovalent actually just announced their partnership with Azure and AKS, and so they actually have a working environment where you could actually go follow the documentation. I've even tested this out too, so it works. You can get Cilium up and online in AKS and take advantage of that eBPF love. Cilium also has applied for CNCF graduation, which means that we're going to see more and more uptick of consumption of the Cilium CNI. And there's a lot of interesting noise around just what Cilium is doing. I will address that later on when we talk about some of the trends. Go ahead, Archie, Mike.
Yeah, I actually just want to reiterate the importance of Istio in the sense that it's actually not been CNCF project and now became CNCF project and straight to incubating. So that it's kind of disrupting again the space of service mesh conversation because there's a Linkerd, there is SMI. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see next year what's going to happen in this ecosystem. And maybe some of the cloud providers as well, maybe might be changing the service mesh implementations on their end. So we're very excited to have Istio in incubation. In terms of Cilium, I just want to add that Cilium became the CNI of all cloud providers. So the last bastion was Microsoft, and it fell. So they basically decided to go all in with Cilium as well. So now AWS, Google, and Microsoft basically making Cilium as the default CNI, or at least working to make it default. But like you have an option to use Cilium now in all three cloud providers, and this is super exciting for many people because like we all love Cilium, I think, now, and understand the value. We've had many events around Cilium, so like it's super exciting. Michael, what about Red Hat device on Edge? Because you were there.
Yeah, and not just talk about Red Hat, even though they're my company. SUSE is also doing something similar. You're starting to see this shift towards containerizing everything on a very limited operating system with everything already running, and this can be flashed so that if you create like a point of sale service or you have some sort of IoT device, it automatically is going to connect to your control plane in a way that is consistent, that you have governance, you have compliance. And so Red Hat and other providers are moving towards this. So I think it's pretty cool that this all got announced, and it's not shocking that it got announced in Detroit with a lot of, say, IoT device companies that were there. That's all I kind of want to say about that. Just take a look. It's going to be really interesting to watch basically Kubernetes become the control plane for a lot of the IoT devices moving forward. So last...
I can actually finish maybe with FluentBit as well. So I'm a big fan of FluentBit project that is basically one of the standard for transporting logs from your applications in containers to your favorite logging solution, whether it's Elasticsearch, Splunk, or your cloud logging solution. So FluentBit v2 version that has been announced, and right now, FluentBit not only going to support logging for transport, but also you can transport your metrics and traces. So this is, I think, makes FluentBit the solution that will be part of your pipeline for your observability. And there's a lot of works happening with open telemetry as well. So like it's kind of, I think this ecosystem is going to be emerging as well. And I'm very excited that FluentBit decided to make this transition into metrics and trace, because you can use this tool across different projects for your Prometheus metrics and maybe for your tracing. So like I'm very excited about that we have CNCF project for this, and it's not like vendor specific solution. And then finally, Cert Manager. This is one of my favorite projects as well, and I'm sure for many of you, like people who is creating ingress or gateways, and they want to have TLS certificate. Back 3 years ago, the Cert Manager creator came to Montreal, and he had his talk about Cert Manager, and we had a chat after that, like, why are you not submitting this project to CNCF? And he wasn't sure if that's a good move. And then after this event in Montreal, they submitted the project, and it was added as a sandbox. For me, surprisingly, Cert Manager has to be like one of the graduated projects, because it's been used for many years by many companies. So it's an incubating project finally in CNCF, making it like, at least have a good status. But like I'm sure there's going to be graduation coming up very shortly as well. All right, that's it on the announcements.
Yeah, so for KubeCon Awards, just wanted to give a shout out and basically tell people that your work is appreciated. I actually had a lot of people coming up to the booth asking how to get started and try to get hired at a company, internships and things like that. I said, joining a community is one way to do it. And you don't necessarily need to be technical. I worked with Catherine and Ray, for example, on some of the documentation in the background. It's all appreciated. And this is just a shout out for the countless hours that people putting into the community. Yeah.
Any Canadians here? Like, I think Puerco is Canadian, like he's, I think, Toronto based, but like he's originally from Mexico, but he's he's a Canadian. I don't know if there's any other ones, but
we'll claim him. Nice.
All right.
And then
Mark, yes, me.
And then just to wrap it up before we have a quick fireside chat, all these sessions are going to be uploaded to YouTube. The co-located events were up there pretty much instantaneously if you want to go check those out. And then I'll post a link with the photos. Now, there's a, let's say, insane amount of photos, but they're very, very well done. And it's pretty cool to see basically everything that I missed because it was a very quick week. If you were there, everything just flew by. So to wrap it up before we get into the first session, just want to have a quick fireside chat. Since everybody had been here, want to talk about, let's say, a topic of discussion that interested you, your favorite session, and then what was fun about Detroit, what event you went to, what'd you like? We're going to go to the new blood. Christine, you're going to kick us off.
Yeah, I think the coolest trend that I saw was around the Gateway API. So if you're not familiar with the Gateway API, it's a new out of the box with Kubernetes, and it's kind of being the superset of the Ingress API. So it allows for a lot more features, and you can see how the standardization across service meshes is kind of becoming this whole holistic story. So that's really exciting. And I like to see that it's like cooperative competition as well. So that's really like the pure embodiment of open source. My favorite event, there's so many to choose from. I think it was really cool to see how the KubeCon team organized some like after parties, and I think that was a really cool way to brush shoulders with like really popular people in the ecosystem. Like I got to meet Joe Beta and Tim Hawkin, which was really humbling to be in the same room with them. And then I would say my favorite session would be, I think exiting Ingress with the Gateway API. I think staying on that same trend of the Gateway API, there was a talk by Rob and Shane that's uploaded onto YouTube. So I would highly recommend to check that out and see what's on the roadmap for the Gateway API.
Sweet, sweet. Marino, kicking it back to you.
Yeah, so I'll start with my favorite session because it actually wasn't a technical session. I think it was at the Contributor Summit, and it was called 10 Ways to Contribute to Open Source, or 10 Mistakes to Avoid Contributing to Open Source. I can't remember the title, but it was with Divya Mohan and Bill Mulligan. Divya works for SUSE and Bill works for Isovalent. But it was actually such a great talk because it allowed a lot of folks to realize that you don't have to be a coder or a developer to actually contribute to open source. And I think like we need more and more of those sessions to encourage folks to jump in. That was my favorite session, to be honest. I caught some others. They were really good as well. I caught a number of ones at Rejects as well. I actually had a weird trip going on because I had to leave Detroit for a family emergency, family first, by the way, and then I had to come back. Well, I didn't have to come back, but I decided I wanted to come back because of the FOMO and whatnot. In any case, the one trend that I found that was like just everywhere was this discussion around edge computing with Rust and with WASM and the combination of the three. And I'm like sitting here thinking, is this the next wave of where we're going in the CNCF, or even just from a technological standpoint? And I have some theories in that, the pendulum swings in multiple directions. We swung towards consuming a lot of the cloud services and whatnot. We may see a little bit of a swing towards consuming much more edge, right? So I'm seeing in 2023 a lot more conversations about edge and even development of applications in Rust, making things much more lighter weight because it performs much better than other languages at times, given the use cases. But that's what I've seen.
Very cool. Sebastian?
So to me, one of the biggest trends talk about that is GitOps, and associated to, so GitOps leads to Argo. Argo is associated with Crossplane. So I want to give a shout out to Crossplane and Abound. I think before they released new in-house providers, better providers, and definitely go back to use Crossplane. It works perfectly with Argo. Big companies are using that, so that's the trend I had. Maybe it's not a trend, but it's very active, and you should have a look into that. And maybe the second one is the virtual cluster thing. It's getting real. Companies are starting using that for preview amps or short-lived environments. So go for vClusters too. I don't have the name of the talks, the different talks I went to, but yeah, Argo, Crossplane, maybe some Adobe talks were about that. Maybe Salesforce was about vCluster. I don't remember, but great talks overall. Great parties. I don't think I have one specific party I want to give a shout out to. I would give a shout out to Archie and myself for our talk, and actually not for ourselves, but for the attendees that were there and went to the talk until the end. So, thank you all.
Awesome. That's a great handoff. Archie.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of things to cover, but like, it's first of all, like it's my 9th or 10th KubeCon. I don't know, I lost the count, but I think for me, KubeCon is like the most important event that I want to attend, obviously, and there's 2 of them. So I was very excited because I missed the EU, so I was very excited to come to KubeCon. And like for me, like I rarely go to the talks. Most of the time I spend, at the booths talking to different companies, trying to find speakers and sponsors for our meetups. And this time I was actually also busy with my talk. So I probably missed half of the KubeCon, but I still got a lot of things, like from the feeling, talking to people and attending some of the talks. So I think for me, the trends this time was surprisingly something new. First of all, was cost control and management. So I think maybe because of this times where people are trying to save money, there's a financial crisis after the pandemic, right? So there's a lot of companies looking forward to save cost. There was a lot of discussions about that, how we can reduce our cloud costs, how we can run Kubernetes more efficiently. So there was a lot of actually people in the expo companies who are presenting, like KubeCost, and there was Harness, who had a very nice tool as well for cost control and cost attribution. There are obviously like cloud providers that are trying to put more tooling for people to have recommendations for their resources and stuff like that. So I think this was one of the new trends that I haven't seen before. And obviously the ones are like pretty, I think, obvious was the Cilium eBPF, continue this trend, like becoming the standard for the networking. I also, because I attended like ObservabilityCon and a few other events, there was still like huge discussion around OTel. The only difference for the OpenTelemetry, I found that before people were talking about it, now there's more and more people who actually using OpenTelemetry instrumentation for tracing, because it's GA right now. And then for the OpenTelemetry instrumentation for metrics and logs are right now already available in previews and getting in betas. So even though this solution is still like in preview, there's a lot of people who are using it. And obviously the DevX platform tools like Backstage was a huge interest for everyone. For my favorite talk, I was attending actually one talk around GitOps and Crossplane, Argo CD with Crossplane by Victor Farachik. That was like, I think for me was pretty cool. And yeah, just general shout out to the keynotes. I want to mention the first day of the keynote, my friend from Ukraine, Ihor Dvoretsky, who used to be working with us at CNCF. So he's serving in the military in Ukraine, and it was a huge surprise for us to see him going on the stage. He was like injured, and just like him there being at keynote of KubeCon and sharing his experience, and he's asked for continuously support Ukraine, and they actually putting up the program in CNCF that will be translating Kubernetes trainings in Ukrainian language so that they can help country to recover post-war. So that for me was like pretty, I don't know, like I was almost crying when I saw him, because like really miss him, and I was just glad that he's alive and can still contribute to Kubernetes community. So that was my takeaway.
Yeah, well, I mean, the nice thing is hopefully you'll see him soon in Amsterdam. Speaking of which, I think if you don't mind sharing again, Archie, I saw Sebastian stand up, so I'm like, we got to get into the demos now. We've been talking for too long. But there is one last thing. KubeCon, Cloud Native Con Europe is in Amsterdam, the 17th to the 21st. That's convenient time. I don't know if anybody wants to look at those dates. I'm not going to say it here, but very cool. I think that one's going to be very well attended. So book now. You can always cancel later for hotels. Get your bookings in. And then what got announced too in Detroit is Chicago next year, November 6th to the 10th on 2023. That'll be in Chicago. I'm not exactly sure what the event's going to be. There's a couple of different event spaces, but check those out. I don't know what, Archie, I don't know if you want to share it, because I know that you guys are going to be talking next. Sebastian, you are going to give a quick 5-minute brief of your session on KubeCon.
I'm actually thinking
Archie,
like
can you share the slides? You're missing the slides.
Is it okay?
Yep, there you go. Say the date again.
Sorry, I thought I'm sharing. So yeah, this is the dates for you, and make sure you submit your CFP. There's a few weeks left until it's gonna close, and this is for Chicago dates. Sebastian, we can give you only 1 or 2 minutes because we are really short on time right now. So just
it's going to be like fast. You can switch to the other slide already. That's the room. We had a very big room, 2 screens, like maybe 100 people. I don't know. I don't know.
170
in person. But like, thank you all for joining. Next slide. You can scan that. Then we have a short URL to get access to the content. Build the slides for the presentation, but at the same time, we build a website. Everything is open source. It's in a Git repo, and the link actually goes to the page generated from the website. So what you'll have during like reading through this website is how to install some local Docker and Kubernetes cluster on your laptop. How to configure your shell, because like if you're just using the plain bash or zsh from your laptop, you're losing a lot of stuff. So configure that correctly, use a theme, add colors, install the cool tools that goes around with kubectl that are going to help you go faster with kubectl. And then there is a UI, how to like tricks on how to use Helm or customize, add more advanced tooling, how to like parse some YAML and extract some or update some information in YAML files on the command line. And the next slide, so this is what you get through the tutorial. So you can do that at home at your pace. You can like keep that in your stash for when you have a new laptop to configure. You can go back to there. That's pretty much it. Like you have a few examples of like what you'll get if you use what's in the tutorial instead of just using kubectl, the plain one, no colors and no aliases, and typing like that on the shell every time you want to do something. Let's go have a look. That's it for me.
Thanks, Sebastian. Yeah. So with that, we have actually about 15 minutes left until the end of the show. So we have Marino from Solo, one of our organizers, who wants to give a teaser for upcoming in-person events, and going to share with us a new variant of service mesh Istio called Ambient Mesh. So hopefully nobody get contaminated with this, but Marino, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Archie. Thanks so much, everyone. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, you should be good.
Okay, perfect. So how many of you know what the Istio service mesh is? If you could just give a thumbs up, or drop a fire in the chat or something like that, it just gives me an idea of how many actually know. Okay, I'm getting some thumbs up. This is good. All right, so Istio as a service mesh, I'm actually going to skip my introductions, but if you really want to know, you can follow me on Twitter, whatever, etc. Istio service mesh has pretty much evolved in a lot of different ways. It's grown. It's been contributed to by so many different companies out there. But I also want to highlight something interesting that's going on in the world of cloud native. We've actually built a lot of our networking intelligence in higher level stacks versus the hardware itself. Our hardware at this point is just moving things around so quickly because, one, CPUs got really fast, really quickly. Two, we're starting to see hyperscalers offer 100 gigabits per second networking, and even then some, like much more, which means like technologies like container networking interfaces, for example, like Cilium, take advantage of that and then allow your containers to just operate at light speed, basically. But to complete the story, you need a service mesh, because you don't want to be sitting there configuring your load balancers yourself, or thinking along the lines of security and observability on your own. Now, the Istio service mesh. I am actually going to, Christine, if you don't mind, maybe, drop some knowledge there, share what you know about Istio service mesh, and then I'll talk about ambient mesh.
Yeah, sure. So currently, the standard for Istio's service mesh has been a sidecar model. So that means we have an Envoy proxy sitting right next to your application. So it would intercept traffic on your behalf. And then that's how you would have observability, security, traffic management. And we can see that that's how the mesh would be formed across your cluster. So that's been like the traditional way. And then I guess for the next part is ambient mesh, which is kind of seeing how we can shift the proxies outside of sitting next to your containers.
I forgot to unmute. And that's exactly it, right? So one little thing about the architecture of Istio, Istio D is a control plane that's deployed into your Kubernetes cluster, and it actually interacts directly with Kubernetes and the Kubernetes API. So any sort of resource that you deploy to Kubernetes, it translates it accordingly based off of the CRDs, or the custom resource definitions that it can understand. And then it passes that configuration data to Envoy. Envoy is basically a router at this point. It'll intercept traffic and it'll process it accordingly based off of what the service is doing, whether it's responding to a request or it's in the request path. So it's actually become a very de facto tool in a lot of different cloud native environments or Kubernetes environments. Now, the interesting thing that happened with the world of service mesh is that we started to see that sidecar resources became expensive resources. Why? Because they consume CPU and memory, especially as you add more configuration to it. It's like a router. Like the more and more logic you add to it, it needs to consume memory to be able to understand what's going on in the routing table, much like the Envoy proxy is doing. So we've kind of had to shift a little bit away from that in certain situations where you didn't need a sidecar. And this is where we introduced this mode called ambient mesh. So much like Christine just mentioned, ambient mesh is this mode where you don't deploy a sidecar anymore. And that sidecar functionality is actually broken up into two functions. One called the Z tunnel, which behaves as a daemon set inside of Kubernetes, inside of your cluster, and assumes part of the role of the sidecar. What it actually does is it does layer 4 connectivity, and it'll also take on the MTLS capability as well. Now, interestingly enough, if you don't need any sort of layer 7 policy, meaning you don't have to worry about things at the HTTP layer, then you're basically processing traffic, or all your traffic, at layer 4. Once layer 7 becomes, a need, once you need to apply a policy based off of, let's say, header attributes or something like that, that's where the waypoint proxy comes into the mix and allows you to add a hop into the request path and effectively process that traffic accordingly. So it's based off of what your situation is, what your needs are. Maybe you don't need the waypoint, maybe you do. But one thing I want to point out here in how ambient mesh works is that the Z tunnel for a given request flow will assume the identity of its originator, and then will form a tunnel, an overlay tunnel called the HTTP-based overlay network encapsulation, to another Z tunnel, or to a waypoint proxy if you're doing layer 7. But what happens is, because it's forming a tunnel, it'll actually send the traffic across as expected. But the other end of that tunnel actually is also assuming identity from its workload, or the receiving workload. So it's kind of behaving like the sidecar, except it's not the actual sidecar itself. You can almost think of it like a gateway resource that lives at the cluster level. Now, how this all works, there is a mechanism through the Kubernetes CSR process, which interacts with the service account to capture that identity and pass that to the Z tunnel, so it can impersonate, let's say, app C, or whatever app it's actually servicing, and on the other end, it does the exact same. So that's how you achieve your MTLS connectivity. Now, you saw earlier on why I called it a VPN. If any of you have played with IPsec, this is exactly what we're doing here, except we're using different protocols. So there's, we're basically cycling through ideas that we've lived through previously, especially in the world of network engineering. we're just doing it at a nano level at this point for the sake of our microservices and our containers. So there are a few more details about this. I'm not going to dig into it, but one thing I will recommend is if you want to get your hands dirty, you want to play around with this stuff, there's a few options. You can obviously come to our workshop that we'll be running in Toronto, Montreal, or Ottawa over the next couple of weeks, or you can actually head over to solo.io Academy. Actually, the real URL is academy.solo.io, and you can actually do a self-paced workshop itself. So there's a link there to the Ambient Mesh workshop. What you do is you just sign up, and then you'll basically be presented with some introductory slides so you can understand some of the key concepts. And then you get presented with a lab environment, much like what you see here. This is a full-on Linux operating system with a Kind cluster running. I've already gone ahead and deployed Istio in ambient mode, and I've just got a few apps being serviced. I'll come back to this in a second, but just so you all have a moment here, you can go hit up that QR code if you want to visit the Academy, or if you want to just grab the ebook of Istio Ambient Mesh Explained, that's your QR code right there. I'll quickly just show you something right here in terms of what I configured. So in this environment, we've just basically deployed a Kind cluster where we're actually deploying the Istio service mesh. But the very interesting thing I want to point out is the profile we set for Istio, and we actually flag it as ambient. So one thing I want to point out is this is not in our main repo or in the main Istio repo. It's actually another branch. So you'll have to go find the branch for ambient mesh. But if you go to that branch, you'll actually see the instructions to get it up and running in your own local system or some sort of Linux system that runs a Kind cluster. Even if you're running a Kubernetes cluster, it's fine. So it proceeds to deploy some of the Istio control plane components and then a few other components as well. So I'll jump to the bottom quickly because I just want to demonstrate something here. So if I do a kubectl get pods, you'll see that I have a workload deployed. It's actually I think it's the partial recommendation service, but we're not really interacting it through a web UI. Now notice when you actually deploy the sidecar resource in normal Istio mode, you do see a 2 out of 2. And that's just because your pod is operating its main container and the sidecar container. But I'm actually going to show you something else here too. If I do a kubectl get pods -- actually, what am I doing? Get namespace -- show labels. There's one label here. There's one namespace here where I've labeled it for Istio. Actually, where is it? Oh, wow. Where did it go? Huh. That's not what I expected. Anyways, there is one namespace here that actually has a label here, and I'll actually show you where I applied it. Oh, maybe I didn't apply the actual label. Oops, maybe I didn't get this up and running as I expected it to. Oh, well. So the whole point of it is that there is a label that's affixed to the namespace where we're deploying our workloads. And normally you would deploy the Istio injection equals enabled label to deploy the sidecar. In this label particularly, you're actually deploying the ambient mesh label, which just says, we're not deploying a sidecar, but we want to enable this environment for ambient mesh. So as a result, when you actually turn that on, what gets deployed is if I do get a kubectl get pods -n Istio system, you see these Istio CNI pods as well as these ztunnel pods. In fact, if I do an O wide, you see how each one is deployed per worker node and control plane node in the cluster. What that's signifying is we're deploying daemon set components here because, again, we're still replicating this concept of the sidecar resource, except we've moved that functionality over to that ztunnel pod. If you go into the ztunnel configuration, I'm not going to do it for you right now, but if you actually went into the configuration, describe the pod, or even just outputted the YAML, you'd actually see what type of container we're actually running, which is, in fact, just the Istio proxy. So what that really translates to is the sidecar is there, just not as a sidecar anymore. One other thing I'll point out is you see this Istio CNI node. What that actually does is redirection of the traffic towards the ztunnel. So if you are familiar with how IPsec tunneling works, there's this concept of defining interesting traffic. You're basically telling your IPsec tunnel which traffic you want to put into the tunnel so that it can be encrypted and sent over the wire. This is very much the same thing that we do currently with the Istio CNI pods that are existing today. That being said, I will stop sharing. And if Christine, if you have any additional thoughts, comments that you want to share or perspectives, go for it.
Yeah, I had two things that I want to mention. One of them I think is something that's really cool is like you can try out experimental ambient mesh, and if you have a sidecar mesh, like the current Istio version, it can work with the ambient mesh. So I think that's something really cool. Like you don't have to flip over everything and like it's not binary. So if you did want to like just dip your toe in and try it out, that's really cool. And another thing that I did want to mention is that it is experimental. So if you try it out, leave feedback on the GitHub or however you want to try it out. But know that there's a lot of improvements and investigations along the way. So yeah, good job.
Thanks. I will just expand on that. It's not production ready, right? So if you're trying to deploy this into production, please don't. Come chat with either Christine or myself, and we'll hook you up with the right folks to at least like have that deeper conversation around what you're trying to do. There are use cases where this is beneficial, but then there are downsides. There are trade-offs with these design patterns, and you always have to sit there and think about those. I am done. Archie, it's all back to you.
Thank you. No, I'm just trying to look for any questions and in the Q&A section, and maybe Marino help me also reading them, because we have a question from Satish Kumar. He's asking about regular Istio workload certificates for service-to-service communication. I don't know if it's a question, but then he says, when we use ambient mesh, does it still use kcert's internal cert? From my understanding, Istio is using certificates that has been generated by Citadel, which is like one of the components of Istio. And is it correct to assume that in this case, we're still using Citadel and it's just the certificates get distributed by zTunnel, I guess, instead of...
Yeah, it's still the same process. It's just who now owns the certificate at this point. And it just happens to be zTunnel at this point because the sidecar doesn't exist anymore. I had trouble trying to find that question, and I found that there was a QA tab here, but we're good. There are a few other questions I saw as well. Let me just go find that out.
zTunnel, I think.
Yes. Does zTunnel, is zTunnel a new concept, technology created by by us? So it actually is a new technology. zTunnel is based off of this technology called HBone, or the HTTP-based overlay network encapsulation. So if you just type in HBone and then service mesh into Google, you'll definitely find a number of resources that talk about it and explain the architecture of HBone. In fact, it uses some existing overlay technology. So if any of you are familiar with Geneve or VXLAN, that's actually under the hood and how this all is constructed. But it's a mechanism to carry HTTP over TCP effectively. The other thing, or the other question that I'm seeing here, high level, what are the best use cases when bugs are ironed out? So you could test this out maybe just in a very closed off environment to just demonstrate to yourself the operational side of it, right? How to onboard into a service mesh without any sort of outage to your existing applications. Because when you do deploy the sidecar resource today, that's a rollout of your deployment again, which means it takes your resource offline. And if you haven't set up the channels appropriately or the load balancing appropriately, you may suffer some sort of outage or something along those lines. So our practices in place, you probably want to consider where using a sidecar might be best. The no sidecar approach is also a mechanism to kind of move away from consuming too much CPU or memory. Heck, we maybe even look at the edge use case at some point in time because it's so lightweight that it allows us to not have to consume so much at the edge itself. But we're still ironing a lot of those use cases out. Christine, any additional thoughts?
No, I think you covered everything. Yeah, try it out if you're curious. And I think there might be a couple more questions that popped up in the Q&A, actually.
Yeah, we can maybe stay after I stop the recording, but I just want to quickly summarize just for people who might be dropping off. So thanks a lot, Marino for sharing with us this teaser. Like, the idea was that we're not gonna go too deep into this ambient mesh today. The idea was that we can actually have deeper dive during the in-person events that is going to be happening in Quebec City, November 16, Toronto, November 17, Montreal, November 22, and Ottawa, November 23. So we can do actually more deeper dive into architecture, how things are working, to the hands-on stuff, and have a community happy hour and some lightning talks. So if you want to meet us again, obviously we're looking forward to travel in all of the cities in the next week. And as usual, if you can provide us a quick survey and feedback that can help us to improve our events, the QR code should be working. But I think this KubeCon recap was just to give you some idea how the in-person events happening. And I think the main benefit of the in-person events is really to meet each other. So I don't really look at the content sometimes. Like, I really want to meet the community. I want to share. I want to ask how people are doing their platforms. So this is a great opportunity to meet again. And I want to thank all the team who joined today to share their thoughts from the KubeCon. I think we all really enjoyed the experience. Maybe we didn't attend all the talks, but like we had really a lot of fun, and it took me 1 week to get back to normal after all of these parties and the hockey game we attended. So it was really, really nice. So thanks everyone for joining today, and we'll see you in next week in Quebec City and Toronto, and then in 2 weeks in Montreal and Ottawa. And we actually have another event coming in December. We're gonna have a virtual event, so we're gonna summarize the year. So we're also looking to meet you, and we're gonna learn about WASM. We have a great speaker that is gonna present around WASM from Microsoft. So we're looking forward to meet you in December. Thank you so much, and I'm gonna stop recording. And if anybody has questions around, we're gonna continue answering.